Welcome to the Safe Business Agility Podcast. This is the place to get advice, stories, perspectives, and updates about safe and related topics to help you work differently and build the future. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts.
Today's guest is Tom Boswell. Tom is a Melbourne, Australia-based enterprise agile coach, safe program consultant, release train engineer, and scrum master with secret pastimes as both an author and a classically trained artist. He's a painter. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed this episode with Tom as he takes us through his career path, beginning as a painter, working through tech, and taking us to where he is today. Tom's a great guy with an interesting story, and we hope you enjoy this one. Tom, what's going on, man? It's good to see you.
Hey, Adam. Yeah, it's great to see you too. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's really great to be here.
For sure. No, it's our pleasure. It's always humbling when people take time out of their day just to hang out and talk without, the promise of coffee, beer, or a good snack. So it's good to see you for sure.
Yeah, no, great to be here. And no incentives needed.
Tom, I got to say, man, we haven't had the opportunity to meet, which I'm sure we will at some point this year at a summit or a conference or something. But I was doing my pre-podcast stalking, AKA research, and I was kind of bummed out to learn that, you weren't the Tom Boswell from the NBA, that you were this Australian guy. So in case anyone else saw the Tom Boswell name on the podcast and they thought, oh, he's like a legendary NBA player. Tell us a little bit about you to keep the folks engaged.
Yeah, that guy is absolutely killing my personal SEO, Firstly, I'm in Australia, but I'm actually from the UK originally. I'm from London. I've just moved to Australia about a year ago. My wife's Australian, so we've moved to Melbourne. And yeah, really loving it over here at the moment. And yeah, about myself, grew up in London. Basically, I've been in digital products and services since about 2011. Really kind of fell into that. My background was I went to art school. I loved art and painting when I was growing up. So I did my degree in fine art and was painting for 4 or 5 years. I think I was a bit of a naive kid. I was really shocked to kind of learn that you couldn't easily make a career out of abstract painting. This came as real news to me. But I kind of, was lucky in that I got into basically broadcast through working in cinemas and then working in kind of very early video on demand, like kind of before Netflix and things had really caught on. So I was working on video on demand platforms and digital products and services, and then came across Scrum basically, and then that just really kind of clicked for me. So I feel like I've been very lucky to just find a career path that I really enjoy, and then through Scrum discovering scaled Agile and working as a release train engineer, and then now as an enterprise coach, across loads of different industries, now across 2 different continents. Worked across like broadcast, worked across video on demand. I've done enterprise for hospitality. I've done enterprise for pharmacy now, internet security. It's been a really kind of diverse and interesting journey, and just didn't have a clue about most of it when I started.
So all of that's well and good, Tom, and we'll dive into it. It's interesting, but the real question is, when's the last time you painted something and what was it?
Yeah, you know what? I've actually just got back into it like a couple of weeks ago after a break of about 7 or 8 years. So I'm doing these these landscapes at the moment because I've moved to Australia. There's all these new landscapes you're sort of seeing, and just trying to process that a bit. But just kind of having fun with that. I used to make these really large paintings in a studio, quite abstract, and now I'm kind of doing kind of smaller figurative things and just having fun with it.
It's crazy all the people I've run into in this space over the years. So first of all, let me say I am not the least bit creative, right? I mean, I ride dirt bikes for fun and do kind of grunt level things. I was in the military for a lot of years, and I still haven't gotten rid of that kind of Neanderthal spirit that I grew up with. So I have no creative ability, but there's so many people I've come across that have. My friend Scott, for example, is a professionally trained opera singer. My colleague Rebecca, she's really into art too. And I think there's something about bridging the space between the traditional creative and the traditional analytic that we typically find that I guess those sorts of people really find that this way of working makes sense because it's not somebody that's wholly creative and looks at the world through a purely abstract lens. And it's also not the kind of person that looks at the world through a purely analytical lens and doesn't want to talk to anybody. But there's an interesting cross section of people. And I think that's driving some really interesting things in our community and also the world of business.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that's really surprised me at the start of my career as well. When I started in kind of tech and IT, I thought, oh, it's going to be lots of people who've gone and done computer science degrees and are kind of from a very analytical background. And yeah, I found there's kind of room for all kinds of different kinds of approaches, and it's very welcome as well. So yeah, for a long time, I just couldn't really figure out how that kind of creative background sort of would fit in with the world that I was sort of operating in. But particularly in the RT role, like I hope we'll talk more about it a bit later, but I find that to be a really creative role. And yeah, combining those two elements, like you said, the kind of like analytical side and the creative side has been, yeah, just really enjoyable as well.
So I think you mentioned that one of your first experiences was with a video on demand service. Now, how did you get started there and what were some of your first roles?
Yeah, so I got started there basically because I'd started to work in a cinema while I was painting to make a little bit of money on the side. And I was working as a projectionist, and it was on all these really old school, beautiful Italian 1960s projectors. But then the world of digital kind of came in and really transformed that industry. They started getting in digital projectors with servers and things like that. And doing that kind of gave me a little bit of a into the kind of broadcasting. So then I went and worked on video on demand services. We were doing work for like Disney and BBC and things like that. And I was working in operational roles. So that's really gave me that's my background in like team operational roles, working in a 24-hour operational department with broadcast deadlines. Through that, I went into service delivery, and that was very client facing. So really understanding kind of like what was important for the client. And then basically going into what were kind of termed as projects at the time. I guess you'd maybe call them value streams now, but digital products basically. So I started working somewhere which in-housed its product development. So that was my first experience to Scrum. And yeah, we were building television apps. We were building a website which had a transactional element, subscription element, free view element. It was kind of an archive as well. So yeah, that was my into that kind of world.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So, you started off in this project-based world, and I feel like we've had this conversation 100 different ways over the years, but it's always interesting to hear people's, kind of personal journey. So you were working in this project world and then something happened. Tell me about your first exposure to Scrum and kind of this new way of working.
Yeah, so yeah, my first experience with Scrum was basically we decided to bring our development in-house. It was being outsourced. We weren't really getting the results we wanted with it. Projects were kind of rolling back. We wanted more control. We wanted more visibility. I think on our side, we were maybe struggling to get good requirements to them and all of those kind of things going on. So the organization I was working at, they got a Scrum Master. He was absolutely fantastic, really great mentor, really knew his stuff, and built a really, really small team that basically then built out 3 or 4 different products. And I was working as a service delivery manager for them. And I was basically doing like, I guess, testing for them, like smoke testing and regression testing. They'd roll out a release and I'd do some testing, make sure the platform was still working, make sure the main functionality was still going. And I was just absolutely fascinated by this like immediately, and just fascinated by the way of working as well. And he just had a really great style where he was just this very kind of empathetic leader, amazing personal skills and leadership skills, and watching him facilitate those meetings and work with the product owner, and yeah, it was just really kind of like a light on moment for me where I was thinking, yeah, that's kind of really speaks to me, and that's where I'd really like to grow my skills, and that's where I want to be. So I was really lucky. He was so generous with his time and making space for me to step in there. So eventually I got the opportunity to take over as Scrum Masters in those teams. And yeah, that was kind of it for me.
And then at some point you tripped on this idea of an RTE. So how did you make that? And again, like your story it's so common in this space, right? I mean, you change the personalities, the faces, maybe the specific industries, but I feel like so many people that end up in the position that you're in have had a very similar, kind of journey of enlightenment, if that makes sense. Um, so help us understand, right? So you were a scrum master in an organization that was a team or two. And then what happened where you got introduced to scaling philosophies in the RTE role?
Absolutely. So yeah, I've been a Scrum Master for or exposed to Scrum for maybe about 2 years or so. And I basically just got contacted by a recruiter who said to me, hey, we're looking for Scrum Masters. We're doing this thing called Scaled Agile. I'd kind of heard of it a little bit, but didn't know an awful lot about it. I was kind of looking for a move anyway. I'd worked in a larger enterprise context before and sort of really knew that there's a lot of value in working in organizations of different sizes. So it was just the right time for a move for me. And yeah, I really didn't sort of know what I was getting myself into, if I'm honest with you. And but I was really lucky as well. I landed in this company that was doing Safe. Their implementation of Safe was really great. It was really mature. It was really kind of thoughtful as well. And I basically became a Scrum Master for them. Did that for a year and a half, and then COVID hit us, and I had to go look for another role. And there was another organization that was kind of just starting to get interested in Safe. They were kind of, exploring different scaling methods, had kind of like a Safe influence thing going on. And they basically wanted someone who was experienced with Safe to come in and facilitate their program. I just got into that role. And that was a really interesting experience because it really coincided with COVID hitting and everyone working at home. And so there were these two things going on. I was going from a team coach role to a program coach role, and also suddenly the entire world had changed. We're all working at home, and we're all trying to figure out entirely new ways of working.
And it sounds like you went from a very mature organization, probably really good leadership patterns, to one that was just trying to figure it out. And I want to dive into that, but first, I really want to talk about your journey from being that scrum master, being recruited into this RTE role in an organization doing this thing that you'd only maybe passively heard about. What was your experience like? How did you get up to speed? What were some of the things that you did? And what was that journey like for you? And I ask that because I feel like what I hear in my role often is, and this is from enterprises and this is from our partners, there's a lot more demand for qualified and talented, skilled, experienced people than there are those people. So I think there's a lot of people that are trying their best with the best of intent to figure this journey out. And I know on your site, tomboswell.com, which by the way looks killer, and we'll link that in the show notes. You have a lot of blogs around this topic, right? Going into the RTE role, accelerating as an RTE. And before we get into some of those kind of deeper conversations, would you please tell us a little bit about your experience, your journey, some opportunities where you tripped, and some great pieces of enlightenment that you'd want to share with others?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I'm really passionate about, and trying to bring out on the website and my writing, trying to share that journey. So I was really, really lucky in my introduction to Safe. I did leading Safe on my 6th day in the organization. Joined on a Monday. The following Monday, I was in a full-on leading Safe course for 2 days. It was a pretty intense start because I guess I hadn't really seen much of Safe. So I kind of went straight into the theory. Kind of got two minds on that, whether it's better to do maybe slightly later or slightly earlier. But for me, that was my experience. It was really great, actually, just to kind of get introduced to the concepts of it. I think a lot of it really clicked for me later. So I had these introductions to these concepts, and then I kind of practiced them. And I find with Safe, it takes most people 2 or 3 PIs for it to really kind of sink in and click. And I definitely feel that was the case for me.
Tom, I actually have a theory about that, right? It's like this theory of threes, and the pattern repeats itself basically throughout embracing change and new ways of working. So if you think of an agile team, it takes them about 3 iterations to get going, right? So the first iteration, they go in, they're excited, they're pumped up, and they generally achieve nothing. The second iteration or sprint, they don't want to do it because that first thing didn't work out so well, and they're kind of grumpy. But then by the time the third iteration hits, it starts to make sense. They get the why behind the principles and the behaviors, and things start to go smooth. And the same things with PI planning, right? The first PI, it's a ton of chaos. It's a new way of working. We're really stressing all of the things that we have to do to get ready for this big event. We're spending all this money and time, and then it's rocky, right? It's rocky not because of any one thing in particular. It's just different. And then there's a little bit less apprehension the second PI, but then by the third PI, nobody's even thinking about it anymore. All those checklists and pre-planning activities that we used to do, this is just business as usual. We don't even think about it, right? So there's something to those patterns of three, and maybe somebody smarter than me wrote about it, but it's interesting that you mentioned that.
No, absolutely. Yeah, there's this math theory called fractals, which is about patterns reoccurring at different scales. And yeah, I think it absolutely holds. And yeah, especially with that pattern of three. And I'd even extend it around, I kind of joke with some of the Scrum Masters I work with. There's also seems to be a pattern where people quite often get a really rocky PI on number 5. Like they get a little bit kind of like overconfident on 4. And then suddenly they have a really tough one on 5, where suddenly halfway through the planning, like their objectives change or something like that. And that gives them a little bit of a shock.
I think what happens there is that the people on that art were successful, and then other parts of the organization say, hey, RTE Tom, you did a great job with that release train. Come do one for us. And maybe some of the leaders and key people leave, and you're kind of starting over again, right? And there's some different change curves that you can look at that illustrate that. There's some that are very smooth. They kind of illustrate this dip and then a smooth climb out. Then there's others that show kind of that rocky forward momentum, a little bit of regression on your climb out, right? And change is messy. It doesn't matter how well you plan it or how well intended you are. Change is messy.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, you definitely have those patterns there that, I have seen in all the organizations I've worked in. That's really fascinating. And then, yeah, you can also use these patterns as like patterns of success, right? You can come up with approaches to kind of, address these sort of patterns that you're going to see. But I guess like going back to what you were asking me earlier, just around like my journey and how I prepared for it. So like safe training kind of relatively early on, I'd say is really kind of a foundational thing that for me and that I really recommend it. And that I do in my organizations. Like I'm an SPC now, and now I deliver the training, and it's really important to get that training in relatively early, whether it's on the 6th day or whether it's like 3 months in, but somewhere early to kind of really be able to kind of anchor that experience to the theory at some point.
So Tom, you mentioned in your experience, right, you felt like you kind of got thrown into leading safe, and we didn't really have a great onboarding plan or like pre-learning at that point in time. Yeah. Have you seen or have you experienced the safe jumpstart that we've done now? And the idea is that, hey, you're going to go into this leading safe course. Here's some foundations you should probably know before you get there, right? Self-paced to ease that learning curve.
You know what? It's funny you brought that up because we've not done it yet, but that's literally the one of my initiatives on our list for this upcoming PI. We've got some training scheduled in, and we're going to start onboarding people onto that jumpstart. I've had a preview of it and a run through it, and it looks fantastic. And it's just really great to be able to do that because with the training, when you're doing it internally, you kind of have this cadence, and you that cadence doesn't always match with the time people are onboarding. So to have this kind of interim step of being able to prepare people for it, introduce some of the concepts a bit earlier is going to be really fantastic to do.
Yeah, that's cool. I can't wait to hear, how that goes for you. We've had a lot of positive feedback, but let's go back to your RTE journey, right? So you've gone through, you start onboarding. Kind of talk us through, how you prepared for your first PI and what that experience was like, and maybe also contrast the Tom of today with the Tom of yesterday. And what are some things that you wish that earlier guy would have known?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. So, like I said, it was a really interesting time to join as an RTE, and I actually think we're kind of just going through the most interesting time to be an RTE still. So for me, it was joining when we'd literally just started lockdown, and in that particular role there, I think they really needed someone. What I recognized was they really needed someone who was going to be able to be a strong facilitator. And also just kind of try and really bring this kind of cohesion to the arts, because we'd suddenly gone from a position where everyone's, in the office, there's some level of cohesion because you're sitting next to each other and you're overhearing each other, to suddenly being isolated and working at home. And when I left, actually, one of the bits of feedback I got that was just really, really lovely was like, one of the team members said, like, Tom makes PI planning almost fun. And it was like, I really took that to be a compliment because, PI planning is amazing, but it's definitely, it's always a challenge and it's always tough on teams. I always like to thank them. I know it's a huge amount of effort, but kind of the contrast of when I started, when it was nearly kind of like entirely cameras off. You could really tell like people were understandably affected by COVID, working at home, and the mood was low. And I think as an RT, I was really trying to take PI planning and make it this kind of like more meaningful, purposeful, kind of like not quite joyful event, but try and introduce some elements of like enjoying human interaction, kind of bringing people together, reminding everyone while they're working together. So I was bringing in lots of like digital tools that would, generate word clouds, lots of polling, like live polling, doing things like the check-ins that the check-ins that teachers often use, like, with the kind of meme style things, doing that, using things like randomizer wheels, and really just trying to find like lots and lots of different ways for people to be able to contribute. Because like, it's really hard for when we're doing remote or hybrid PI planning, when you're at home, to kind of like contribute sometimes if you're one of the participants on the art, to want to put up your hand in front of 70 people or feel like you're going to jump in on the conversation. So for me, in that particular RT role, it was a lot about kind of trying to build this event that really felt like this good thing that people would look forward to coming to, and trying to just bring out different ways for people to be able to participate into that and feel comfortable and enjoy it a bit more.
So in your experience, Tom, have you had much luck with really great themes? I mean, I know if I look over the years, I've had some that didn't land so well. I've had others that have just been amazing. And I guess a few that really stick out. The first one, I was working with a client in the Midwest, and we had planned their first PI planning over a Midwestern holiday, which is the first day of hunting season. And I didn't know this, but it was a big thing. It was a really big deal. So what we tried to do to kind of smooth over the feelings is we went out and got a bunch of Nerf bow and arrow and some, plastic deer and some different targets. And at every break, so the theme was first day of hunting season, and everybody went out and they wore their orange into the office. And, that silly thing really took and transformed the attitude of a day that people were really not happy about, and made it something that they at least found humor in. Right. And I feel like that really solved for some of the negative energy. And another one that I thought was really powerful, this was one that my colleague Tamara put on, and this was right after we had planned a safe summit at the end of a PI. And as you can imagine, building a conference like that, there's a lot of things that go on. And when people start moving fast and try and get things done, maybe people are a little shorter than they intend. Maybe things don't get said in the best of terms. And I thought that she was really aware, and that she recognized that happened. And the theme for the PI immediately following that event was an award show. So she came in, I'll never forget, she was in, if anybody knows Tamara, they can kind of picture this. She was in a floor length gold sequins gown, and she was an awards show host. And for our INA, what we did that time, because the most important thing for us to do before we planned was to start repairing relationships, she handed out these index cards with a little trophy on it. And everybody came up and they got as many as they wanted. And everybody showed either a gratitude or made an apology to somebody else in the office. So everybody took the time to reflect and, think who helped them, think who maybe they wished they could have interacted with a little bit different. And we took time to write those things out, and we passed them out to one another. And, that theme ended up being exactly what we needed to prepare for the next PI, and to kind of fix some things that, maybe didn't go as well as planned. Then there's others, like the beach themes don't usually go well. And there's others that feel a little more forced. But I think those are two good examples that I feel like the theme almost saved the day. Have you seen things like that in your experience?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I kind of do see a lot of places that do themes, and I wonder if it is kind of a more cultural thing. In the UK, I certainly wasn't seeing very much of that. I've not really done it myself, but I really love the idea of the awards one, where maybe it is tied to something where there's kind of like a little bit more, not quite meaning to it, but there's kind of a purpose behind the theme, right? In that you're celebrating others. So I really love that as an idea. And
it's not just this thing we're doing because we're supposed to. We're doing it because there's a deeper meaning, because it's going to fix another problem or address an issue. So I'm totally aligned.
Yeah, no, I really love that.
So let's go back to Tom. What would you, Tom of today, tell Tom of then? Like, what are the biggest mistakes that you think you made as a beginning in RTE? And what would you do to coach yourself today, Tom, coaching then, Tom?
Oh, wow. Yeah, good question. So I think probably trying to take on too much was one of my early mistakes. I think, we, as Agile coaches, we're doing things like coaching whip limits and stuff like that. And sometimes you do forget to do that a little bit yourself. And so, I think that was an early one. I was just spread too thin, trying to work across too much. I think something that I was doing early on as well was just, and again, you kind of do it it's quite a common pattern in team sort of coaching that you then scale up to program coaching. I think I was kind of putting a little bit too much pressure on myself, thinking that I was going to really be able to make these really large shifts, sometimes a lot faster than the organization was ready. I've now learning to become a lot more, not even just quite realistic in my roles, but realistic in my expectations, but just changing my perspective as to, what I'm there to do, maybe in terms of making shifts. I now kind of see it more in terms of I'm there to help the organization kind of find a healthy expression of the level it's at, rather than sort of pushing it to something that I want it to be.
You touched on something important there, right? And that's, kind of the leadership perspective and the culture. And we all recognize at this point that leadership has to lead the change. They can't just mandate that you go work a different way and they keep doing their own things. And, in your role as an enterprise coach now, I suspect that you are able to take the lessons you've learned having gone through these transformations 2 or 3 times as a contributor. What are some of the things that you try to impart on a new organization who might be going down this path for the first time? How do you set them up for success? What are some of the, entrance criteria that you have before you'd be willing to jump in with a new client, start their transformation, begin their journey, launch an art?
Yeah, for me, it's really understanding, what is it that you want to get out of this transformation, or, out of this coaching. Particularly, I'm working in the context of SAFe. So what is it you think SAFe is going to do for you? How can I work with you to sort of understand how SAFe can sort of get you there?
I want to pause you right there, Tom, because you're hitting on something really important. And it's one of the things that keeps me up at night, right? So, in my previous life, when I was, working in large consulting, we'd run into this a lot where organizations would basically say, come install SAFe, right? Come in, do the SAFe, and let me know when you're done. And you don't ever want to embrace any change or start any change journey for the sake of change, right? I like to use the analogy of, if, you're really into eating donuts and you eat a dozen donuts a day and your doctor says, Tom, you got to stop eating the donuts, man. And that's it. You're going to be like, well, shove off, man. I'm going to eat all the donuts I want. But if he says, Tom, you got to stop eating those donuts. If you keep doing that, if you keep going down that path, you're probably not going to live to see your kid's 10th birthday. Well, then there's a why, and you're going to think twice about picking up that donut. And that's the same thing with SAFe. Too often, people focus their transformation on doing SAFe or doing SAFe well, or, we're asked, what are the best metrics that we can track to make sure that we're doing SAFe right? And it's not about that, right? When you start down this path to embrace SAFe, there's got to be a reason why. And if you can't align on that first, if you can't tell me the problem that you're trying to solve, I'm reluctant to engage with you as a client, right? I mean, you got to root it in that. We don't go to PI planning for the first time. We don't do all of this training. We don't change our language and change our behaviors because we want to do SAFe. We do them because we want to be more customer centristic, because we want to deliver value faster, that we want to increase quality. There's so many reasons why. And I feel like, especially now, there's these patterns that we see. It used to be, and you experienced this in your beginning part of your career, where any new way of working, be it Scrum or Kanban or whatever, was a team thing. It started there and it kind of bubbled up. And then it was this thing because of Gartner and HBR and other places that executives were starting to see. So they would tell and cascade to their team members, hey, go do Agile, go do SAFe. And so if you're a VP, you're like, all right, cool, go do Agile, go do SAFe. I'm going to be over here doing this other thing. And they miss the why, right? Why are we doing this? What is wrong with our system that we need to address? What competitive advantage do we seek to embrace that makes this change worthwhile? So I think it's really cool that you lead with that, right? What's your why? Why do you have to do this? I read Simon Sinek again yesterday on the plane, so I guess I'm kind of stuck on why, but I think that's a really important thing, and thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I think you hinted at something really interesting there in the transformation. Is they're kind of really very often a focus on Agile in terms of being this kind of development optimizing activity. It's something that exists in technology and maybe in product. And that's kind of something that I'm trying to help organizations sort of think a little bit more widely about.
Absolutely.
Like we don't want to just optimize the system around the teams. And often, there's very little value in optimizing lead time in technology if something's kind of sitting upstream there for 4 months, and we're kind of really trying to force teams to shave the day off when it's been sitting in the department for 4 months or something like that.
I think we see that a lot, right? Where people think, hey, I'm in legal. This Agile thing says software over the place. Doesn't mean anything to me. And see, there's also a lot of conversation around, is it time to update the manifesto? And when I get into those conversations, I always kind of go down the path of, we can't forget where we came from, right? When the manifesto was written, what was happening? What was happening in the world in 2001? Well, the dot-com boom, right? And it was a matter of survival. In order for us, and beyond that, right, with the dot-com boom, what happened was software was moving from big software companies like Microsoft that would ship, Windows 1995 with a stack of CDs and an encyclopedia worth of books, to an environment where anyone with an idea in an exe file could put it online, and there it was for the world to see, right? So if you wanted to be competitive, you had to change the way that you worked, or somebody else that was moving faster was going to take your business. And I think that's so important, because that same context is applicable to literally everybody today. We're in a world where you can buy a desktop CNC mill, you can buy a desktop 3D printer, you can go out if you have a little more money and you can 3D print engine blocks in your garage. So that historical context is so important. What was taking place at that time? Why did they develop this new philosophy for working, and what was the result? And if you apply that same story to anything today, well, it might say software, but you understand the context and you understand the intent, and it applies to everybody. It's immutable. And you look at the safe, lean, agile principles, and it's the same thing. I don't care who you are or what you do. If you're a team of one, you're a team of 10,000. It doesn't matter what you do. You can be better by embracing those principles. And sure, how you apply the tools and how you look at the framework might vary. But that mindset and those values and those principles are completely immutable. And it doesn't matter who you are or what you do. You can be better by focusing on those things and their intent.
Yeah, absolutely agree. The mindsets, the principles, those things still stand. And then it's just almost a case of, there's that, and then there's all these other great things that we're building on top of it. And there's very little I see that I feel is really in stark contrast to anything that's there in the manifesto or in those early kind of thinkings. Sure, the context has changed a bit and some of the specifics are a little bit different, but it's remarkable how much was kind of right in that early thinking and still applies today.
Sure. And I think that's really important, right? It's, a 20-year-old document, but it still hits hard. I mean, there's maybe, like you said, a few words in there that you're like, man, that's a little dated. But for the most part, right, the intent's immutable. And, you start thinking about how people, what they value today, what we learned through the pandemic. And it's almost like that mindset, values, and principles was guiding us and preparing us to thrive in that weird period of time. So, Tom, like as we start winding this down, thinking about your journey from Scrum Master to RTE to coach, what are 3 simple things that you would give anybody else as tips as they begin moving along a similar path?
I think the first one that comes to mind is, understanding that there are different capabilities required for those different levels. And it's not just the case of taking what you know and applying it to the next level. They're entirely different skill sets, and you need to really invest time in yourself and in your learning to rise to those different levels.
So I think I heard you say, stay humble and stay curious.
That's a nice summation of that for sure. So
perfect.
Definitely something around there. I think another one is just understanding that although they're kind of different levels, they're not better. Like being a program coach isn't inherently better than being a team coach, and being an enterprise coach isn't inherently better than being a program coach. They're just different. So like I said, different capabilities, and they're just different.
On that one, how many people do you run into? Everybody wants to be an enterprise or portfolio coach, but how many people really want to be an enterprise or portfolio coach, right? It's not a hierarchy. It's a good understanding of your skills and strengths, and then seeking the best fit for those skills and strengths.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I meet team coaches now who are just, I've been out of team coaching for a couple of years now, and I meet team coaches now, and their capabilities in team coaching are far more advanced than mine. That's kind of what they specialize in. And, I'm not saying I'm a bad team coach by any stretch, but I've put my focus in growing my capabilities in those different areas. So yeah, it's not a case of better or worse. It's just a case of different capabilities. And then, my third piece, it's just about the learning. It really is just keep on learning, whatever you're doing, whether you're, whichever level you want to do. If you're growing out at more of a kind of horizontal level, there's just always more to learn. So just keeping that appetite there for learning, and it's really like the key one, I think.
So the summary of Tom Boswell's keys to success: stay humble, stay curious, focus on your skills and strengths, and seek the opportunities to thrive, and keep on learning at all costs.
Absolutely.
It's a pretty good list, Tom. Nice work. So the last one that I want to hit you with is, you've had a journey, you've done a lot of things, right? You started off in art school, you went into media, you got introduced to Scrum, you grew into an RTE. Now you're a coach. You've seen a lot of things, you've broken a lot of things. It's a badge of honor. What do you think is the number one misconception in this space, and what would you like to tell the listeners about that misconception?
I think the number one misconception in the space, or maybe it wasn't a misconception, but now it's becoming one, is that technology, digital products is like only for a certain type of person. It's not for you if you don't fit in a very narrow box. I think just the amount of diversity we're starting to see in terms of people in all kinds of roles is just really exploded in the last few years. I think that's the biggest misconception today, is I think for sort of outside people thinking, yeah, this isn't for me, where there is absolutely a space for all sorts of different types of people, different types of thinking. And that's amazing.
It really is. It's 2022. There's no such thing as a non-tech company, right? I kind of grew up in a rural part of America, and, you used to think that farming was this very, kind of physical thing. But, I don't know if you've seen the inside of a tractor lately, but it's more complicated than my iPhone. Technology is everywhere, and we're all technologists. And I think the cool intent of the digital revolution and digital transformation was to really get rid of that line, right? We are a digital society. We need to figure out how to best leverage technology to excel as a digital society. And it's just getting more and more advanced every day. And we need all the skills and all the personalities and all the perspectives. And I think that's a really great takeaway.
Absolutely.
So Tom, what do you want to wrap up with?
Yeah, I guess I just want to finish by thanking you for having me on the podcast. It's been a real pleasure to be able to come on here and share some of my experiences. So thank you, Adam.
Great, man. Is there anything you want to plug before we cut off? Your website, anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. So, thanks for plugging my website. You can look me up on tomboswell.com. I also blog a little bit on Medium, and you can find the link via that. You can find me on LinkedIn under Tom Boswell, and we've just put out an article on the Scaled Agile blog on this topic, from being a release train engineer to a enterprise agile coach. So it's a fantastic article. I've had a lot of help from your team writing it. So please check it out, and I hope it's useful.
All right, Tom Boswell. Thanks, man. Have a good night.
Thanks, Adam. Take care.
Thanks for listening to our show today. Be sure to check out the show notes and revisit past episodes at scaledagile.com/podcast. Relentless improvement is in our DNA, and we welcome your suggestions for the show. If you have something to share, send us an email at podcast@scaledagile.com.